Well, thanks everybody for coming. When Hannah asked me to do a presentation and just really said education, I thought, oh my gosh, what's the thing I really want to talk about? And I thought, educational theory. And then the very next thought was, oh boy, what's the thing that people like to hear the least about? And I thought, oh, theory. We got a lot of teachers in this room that have a lot of experience, some of them maybe even more than me. And we have some students in the room, and I am happy to see all of you because you are all concerned with improving your teaching practice. And that is so exciting to me. It's the reason I love education. So welcome everybody. And I want to say right up front, if you teach, whether you've taught for a day or for 20 years, you use educational theory. So you are currently using it. You may not know it by the name that it has, but you are using some aspects of educational theory. So this is a really good thing that I think can be helpful to your practice. And I do have a handout where I put some of the most common educational theories that we're seeing used with today's learners that when we get to that point, I'm going to pass it out, and that's for you guys to take with you. But I think it'll be really helpful. So forgive me for having to kind of stay in one place, but this is being recorded. So Kevin has told me I'm on this invisible leash, and I can't go very far. And also, I feel like this is a really intimate group. So at times, is it okay with you if I sit down? All right. Now, I also am huge on interactive. So questions, please don't wait till the end. Ask them anywhere that you find them. And if you have an experience to share, please share it, because this is all about us. So finally now we're starting some sessions where we're focusing it in on me as a teacher. So I'm very excited for this series of brown bags and how they unfold with speakers. So let's go first, hey, what would it be if we didn't start with objectives, right? So we got to have a few of those. So I am going to talk for just a couple minutes about, this is very much preaching to the choir, about some of the challenges that we're seeing with trying to teach students today. If you've been teaching for very long, you know how much students are different than they were even a few years ago, let alone 10 plus years ago. So we're just seeing very different groups, and that has a lot of implications for us in the class, in the clinical setting, if we're working with them in simulation, and how we work with them and the kind of theories that are kind of driving that. And then talk about, that connects right exactly to those theories, and then talking a little bit about a couple of the paradigms, because the discrete theories that we use are contained within those paradigms. And we're not going to talk about any nursing grand theories. So I know you all remember that from your master's program, so don't worry about that. And then we're going to apply some of the selected ones. So let's roll. So I like using animals in my presentations because I don't have kids, so I can't put kid pictures in there unless I pull them off the internet, which I thought, no, that's not nice. So I thought I want to find a representative, I like to find representative animals that relate to a theme that's in the presentation. So in this case, the animal, the giraffe, has all these characteristics, which are also the characteristics of somebody, a really enlightened educator who's using educational theories to drive their practice as a part of their best practice. So giraffes have a lot of vision, patience, intelligence, perception, discernment, resourcefulness, and they're very cooperative animals if you ever look at them with when they're around all the other giraffes. So you'll see a giraffe or two. Plus, they're the most hysterical animal when they put their tongue out. It's just, wow.
really something.
Oh. Some of these statistics are a little bit old, but it does give you a glimmer just about how much things have changed. Now, in no way, shape, or form do the pools of nursing students that we see mirror the patient populations that they're caring for. But we're getting better. So we are seeing more diverse students. And the same is true, of course, of faculty ranks. So we're even less representative than the students that we teach. But we're getting better, too. So, but just in that 8-year period, it was up 10%, much more than that now. One of the things that I love very much about this School of Nursing is that it is among the most diverse in nursing classrooms that I've ever seen. When I sit in the undergraduate classrooms, the number of male students, it's inspiring. The number of male students, the number of minority students, it is truly inspiring. And also, you know, of course, we have a lot more male students, which their numbers are still incremental compared to females, but they're going up, which is great. And the number of young nurses has really been increasing. So this is talking about that have graduated from nursing school. So they're entering the workforce now earlier, which is really great. And the age ranges, though, if you're teaching in a classroom, you know this, they're all over, you know, from very young to older than you, standing up in front of them teaching. And then they have lots of differences in their technical proficiency, just as we do. So most of the ones, all of the ones that are younger it's second nature to them. Some of the more older students still maybe a little bit of a challenge. So they're all over the board, and so are we. Is there anybody who hasn't had a student come and help them with some piece of technology in the classroom? Right, okay, so you know what I'm talking about. Okay, just a second on the different generations, you know, the boomers, you know, I'm soon to be in that group. Yeah, right, no, I am. But, so I picked out the best of the things from these groups. And they don't always fit the characteristics of their generation, but a lot they do, and it helps us understand, particularly with these youngest ones, the team-oriented and seeking immediate feedback. And when I say immediate, we're talking about immediate. So, yeah, I can remember taking nursing tests where it was, you know, first of all, it was on the test. You actually circled the answer. Anybody remember those from a long time ago? Not bubble sheets, on the actual test. And then a week later, scores would be posted on a board. A week later. Could you imagine if that happened now? Yeah, no, not very much. So we have tons and tons of students that are in these two categories, but increasingly in this one. And so they instantly can identify with, of course, younger teachers. But, you know, with that youth needs to come, you know, I know what I'm doing teaching. Now, in addition, these things have always been the case in nursing, always for us in nursing programs or any educational program, but it's much more so. So we see vast differences in students' cognitive abilities and even in their physical abilities. So a lot of nursing programs, in order to keep patients safe, have created the minimum expectations for what you physically have to be able to do. And that's important. It is important in our profession, really important. But the differences in cognitive abilities help us to understand things like if you're in a team-based learning classroom, and those of you remember, most of us remember Dr. Clark, who's a real leader, Michelle Clark, a real leader on team-based learning. And she would talk quite a bit about spreading intellectual capital. Because the cognitive abilities are not all the same across every group of students, you know, she would try to assure that the groups that she was putting students in had a spread of intellectual capital. When we teach students in a clinical setting, there are objectives. So these are the minimum expectations that the student is expected to be satisfactory in at the end of the semester. Do some students exceed those expectations? Yeah, this is where you say, yeah, of course they do. Some students meet them, some students exceed them, and there may be some that don't meet them. So where do you spend more of your time as a clinical instructor? Is it, be very honest about this, is it the student that's excelling, that you've been with enough to know they're excelling, or is it the student that's struggling? Which one do you think?
The sharper one.
Right, the one that maybe is coming along, but they need more of your guidance. They need more of your time. And that's what we do. We just do that as clinical instructors. But we do need to be mindful that the other excelling students may feel, well, for lack of a better word, gypped. You know, they want some of that attention too, which gets us to a theory. And all kinds of differences with the rest of these has always been the case, but a lot. And this last one with their support systems, huge. Now we have, you know, that's enough right there. That's plenty. But then we have a lot on our side, on the academic side. So this constant drumbeat for higher faculty productivity, often in an era with less resources or limited resources. All of this is occurring in a time crunch for your preparation, time crunch with the amount of time that you have with your students. So it's that constant cooker. And the barrage of new information. I don't care what specialty you're in, it's nonstop now, nonstop. And our ability to access it is 24/7. So there's more competition for students, particularly as the proprietary schools have opened up, which has meant we have more nursing students enrolled, which is a great thing, but now we have more competition for sites, which has helped us to become a lot more creative about meaningful ways to provide safe educational experiences for them. So we have to be practical in thinking about how we're going to work with students to develop them in meeting learning outcomes. And using this educational theory in a more conscious way can help. I like to relate this to a grounded practice. So if you're an educator, all of us have taken classes where the teacher has talked about some theories. And if they were like some of the classes that I had in my master's program, they were flat out boring. And I had a hard time seeing what any of that meant to me in terms of me being a nurse. So, but as teachers, we're committed to this idea that there are some theories that we want our students to learn and to use them in their clinical practice. It's important. So we hope that they go forward and that they have a practice that's grounded on the use of theories that help them in their practice, the use of best evidence, and also that they have moral and ethical comportment. So at the end of the day, we want them to have those things. Because the theory part of this informs their practice, it guides their practice, and in some ways it can predict what they're going to see in their practice. So we need to be cautious about the numbers of theories that we're laying on them and how we're connecting them to something that means something to them, which is clinical practice. So this kind of brings us to our use as educators. So we think about novice educators, and I'm not all that big on quotes, but this quote really struck me when I saw it, that the failure to use a learning theory, an applicable learning theory, can affect the outcomes of learning, so that what might happen is, if you're not thinking about this kind of stuff, is that you just end up dumping a whole bunch of content onto students. And they can't even work their way through that. then they're asking you the questions, well, what do I need to know about all this? And I just had to mention that your personal educational philosophy plays into that, because those are the theories that you feel resonate with you and the ones that you're more likely to use. They make more sense to you when they line up with what you believe about yourself as a teacher, your students as learners, and the environment that it all occurs in. So when it comes to us, just as we teach our students to ground their practice on theoretical principles that apply, we should do it too. But in our case, our practice is education. So that's our practice. So it can inform the whys of what we're teaching with students and the ways that we're doing it. It will guide us and help to predict us, for us too, what we're seeing. So these are all really helpful things. So what I'm suggesting to you is that you're all using theory. How consciously you're using it, that's for you to say. And is there more to learn about the use of certain theories that will help you in your practice? And even for me, after all these years, I'm learning about them all the time. And there are, you'll be glad to know I'm not going to talk about all of them, but there are several dozen sound educational theories. So there is no one. And I found for me, there is no one that explains all of it. So now I want to, just for a second, I want to pause. And for those of you who have been teachers in the classroom, just ask you to think back when you were teaching, early in your teaching, and how you decided you were going to go about your teaching. So when you were going to stand up that first day in the classroom, how did you decide how it was going to unfold? Who will share something? What you got, Michael?
I approached it based on how I was taught.
Exactly. So if you heard what Michael said, he said he approached those early times when he was teaching based on the way that he was taught. Now, if you were like me, primarily I was taught via lecture. And the lectures were largely what we call one-way lectures, like kind of this has been. So, I'm kind of talking to you or at you instead of, and the more interactive lecture where there's lots of exchange. So it was second nature to me I never gave it a thought. I put tons of time into the preparation, and I went in and I delivered it. Did you see a problem with that for you, Michael, over time?
Yeah, I guess the first problem I noticed was how time-consuming it was on my part. Right? When I first started doing it, right, was how time-consuming it was on my part. And over time, I realized that it wasn't the most efficient way of disseminating information and getting my students to learn. It wasn't the most efficient way or effective way at teaching students how to apply the information. So there was a lot of problems over the years.
Yeah. So lectures, it's still one of the more common ways, and one of the things that lecture is best for is being able to deliver large amounts over a short period of time. But that doesn't mean that they got it. So maybe something else, which has driven people more into things like flipped classrooms where they have shorter segments, or sometimes called lecturettes, or shorter segments of things that are lectures. But what Michael said is it didn't seem to be time efficient, and it didn't seem to be moving them as much as he wanted toward them being able to actually directly apply what they were learning. In my case, what I noticed was they didn't seem engaged. They were just sitting there. And they didn't have all the distraction things that students have now in terms of the techno devices, but you could tell they were kind of tuned out. And so I started exploring around for other ways. So a little bit of knowledge about educational theory could have helped me to get to that, or even to understand why they weren't as engaged as I thought they should be. So, but that was then. And no matter how much preparation you've had, you know, those early times, I suspect for teachers that have been teaching for some time, you don't exactly teach the way that you taught that first day. Do you? No? A little bit different. Still use lecture? Yeah, sure, we still use lecture. But we use other things too, because we want to engage all of the students. Another, you know, just my last quote, but you know, it's from Maya Angelou. You have to put one in because she's so great. But I did then what I knew how to do, and now that I know better, I do better. And that's the truth. So it's all been a growing field. So at the instant that we as teachers look at ourselves also as learners, then we know we have an obligation to continue, as much of an obligation as we have to teach our students, we have an obligation to keep continuing to learn about ourselves as teachers and how we go about teaching. So then that gets us to the educational theories. So there are 4 major educational paradigms that most all theories are falling somewhere under one of these 4. But there's a ton of theories. So these are all, I'm going to talk for just a minute about them because they're all either very familiar to you or they will be as soon as I say a couple words about them. So behaviorism is tried and true in nursing courses and all kinds of courses from K all the way up. So if you've ever given a student a test for a grade, if you've ever given a student a paper that they get written comments and a grade on, if you've ever given student feedback in clinical or during a simulation, you've engaged in some type of behaviorist learning principle. So performance can improve based on feedback, the reinforcement that the student gets. So when a student doesn't do well on a test, that's not a positive reinforcement. So they know that maybe that there's something they need to change. So we use it a lot. We wouldn't call ourselves a behaviorist or wouldn't describe ourselves as that, but we typically use it in our classes as a routine part of our teaching. And it's fine. It's one of many. People are motivated in their learning by different things, so the extent to which they're motivated by things like grades, progressing, graduating, those kind of things, these things can really work. So Gagne is someone who's written quite a bit in these areas about this, but I want you to think about your teaching and think which of these you use. I can see them very clearly in clinical, these categories all unfolding in clinical settings and in simulation settings. And my question would be, to what extent are we doing this in classroom settings? So in classroom settings, when you start a class, you have to have a way to get their attention. Or, you know, you would think that you would, instead of just sailing in and, I don't know, assuming that you have their attention. And then all the way down through the very end of this, a lot of times in the classroom, we don't do all these categories at the expediency sometimes of lecture. So again, where places like the more flipped classroom or just where you just change it up, maybe it isn't a flipped classroom, but maybe what it is shorter, discrete segments of lectures that are interspersed with some of these other steps, can keep them more off balance and more engaged in their learning. So, and I can make these PowerPoints available to anybody that wants them, so don't worry about them. Don't worry. So Cognitivism, there is so much on cognitive theories, and there are so many individual theories in cognitive theory in that big category. But this is what's getting into the mental processes. So if you're interested in how you're developing students as critical thinkers or higher order thinkers, you're kind of very interested in this. So it's all internal, what's going on, how their thinking is developing and changing over time. And what we know as someone on the outside, when you get into cognitive theories, is you understand that how do I know someone is really cognitively, if they're really stimulated, if they're really developing in their thinking? How do we know? We know by the product that we see. From the outside, what do we see? We see either a change in behavior, something different in behavior, or we see something different on something, like a test, like a paper. So we see the product, but if we want to know about the process that's changing in their mind, if we want to know how it's occurring, we have to do something else. So we have to design assignments that will make them have to show it somehow. We do it sometimes when we have them diagram something or explain a drop of something to something else and how it all gets there. Talk aloud research tries to get to that. So that's where there's some kind of device that's on the subject, and you have the student, the subject, talking through their thinking process as they're coming to some decision. And that's actually research. So other ways that we do it, and the clearest example for us probably is through the art of questioning. So we use it extensively as clinical instructors. We're trying to find out not just what they know, but how they know it. How did they get there? So if I'm going to help or influence something, I need to know how you got there. What was your thinking to get there? And we do it in classrooms too. But I see it a lot in clinical settings, clinical and simulation settings. So this is very interesting, just thinking about how fast this all occurs. So we take in information through our senses and think of just the barrage of information that's coming in to people every second of every day. So we take it in, and then we're right away, as soon as there's information there's filtering that's going on in the mind, determining whether or not to reject it outright. It doesn't fit in with anything. It's just instantly rejected, or it's processing through and being adapted as it's being processed. But it's occurring in milliseconds. In milliseconds, people are making decisions. And it's all occurring in the mind. So it happens very quickly. So you're able to reach them either quickly or if it takes too long, you're not. Because they've already decided it isn't important, or I don't agree with it. So if you're teaching a class of students that are coming into, I hate to pick on OB, but since it's one of our specialties, I will. You need to know that you have students that not everybody coming into the class has an automatic built-in, I can't wait to learn about OB. You know, there are some people that are committed. I can't stand OB. I'm not ever going to work with OB patients. None of this means anything to me. So you have literally little time to be impactful with them before they're tuning out, because they're already starting tuned out. So that can really help drive the way you're presenting initial information to them. Initial information for impact. Because you want it to get into these deeper processes in the brain where all this processing is occurring. Let's see. Whether or not it gets to long-term memory, you know, it's got to be important for it to get all the way through to long-term memory. You know, the more people have information they can access on their devices, and I think that's a good thing that we have all this information on devices, it causes us to have to really examine what is important for the student to know that they don't find out because they looked at their device. So it can really help you determine what's essential for them to integrate into their mind versus, I don't know, I just got to look it up. Because we expect them to commit some things to memory. Yeah? Okay. So I'm going to talk about a couple things under constructivism because it's an offshoot from cognitivism. But what I like about constructivism, and probably all of you use constructivism. I'm sure you all use cognitivism, and I bet a lot of you are using constructionism too, or some combination of those both. So it's got the elements, some elements of cognitive, but what's interesting about constructivism is that it really takes environment and experience into account. So it's kind of led to this whole offshoot of social constructivist educational theories. And this is our understanding. So they're not just learning from us, they're learning from peers around them. They're learning from the experiences, not just that they've had, but the experiences they are having. So all of this, it isn't just the content on the paper. It's not just what's in the book. So here is, I don't know if you can see this or not. Though I talk about this for just a minute. So if you think about your mind as, you know, what does the mind seek? The mind seeks equilibrium, a balance between thinking and reality. So that's like baseline. That's comfortable. Not disequilibrium. Disequilibrium is just really when there's a conflict between what I think and what I'm encountering or what's out there. So there's a conflict. We don't like that in our mind. We don't like that conflict. So we want that to go away. So that sets into effect these processes of assimilation and accommodation. And when we assimilate, we've taken information in, whatever this encounter or this information is, and it goes into these, what are called in the literature knowledge units, or you may have heard of them as schema in the brain. And they're these little units. I'm just being very visual about this to kind of, you know, it helped me to kind of get it. So these little units of knowledge, that there are these little knowledge units. And this incoming tries to connect to these, you know, to make sense of it, to connect to these knowledge units. And when they can connect into the knowledge units that exist, then fine, they can. But we haven't grown those networks. We haven't complicated or stretched those schemas. So when new and compelling information that comes in that still doesn't seem to fit, but hasn't been rejected, what happens in the mind is it causes a reshaping of the schema, these knowledge units, and the development of new knowledge units, and an increase in the number of connections. So if you saw it visually, it would look like this network that's getting more and more complex, which is a great thing. So there's more and more connections. And the more highly developed these connections are, the faster we process. So this is why experienced nurses who have lots of experience of repetitive things over and over again in different contexts are able to do things what looks like to students as lightning speed. And that's the reason why. So we want to be able to do that, and then once the mind is able to do that, it gets back to a state of equilibrium, which is the comfort zone. Does that make sense? Yeah. Anyway, the whole line of anything brain-based learning, cognitivism has just, it's really been fascinating. And the work that we've seen done with people that are hooked up to EEGs and all kinds of different things when they're stressed in terms of new knowledge and emotional learning has just been fascinating. But this one kind of shows the connections too with experiences, reflection, and communication. So it's all good. And then this fourth one is on humanism, which we all use that. Sorry. Which we all use that. Some are, this is an exclusive realm for them. This is where they live. This is their comfort area. And I really don't have a lot to say about this. I mean, I think it's wonderful, and it has led to, it's probably an area that we're developing more in nursing. We have a history of being very good in the cognitive realm and in the psychomotor realm. And this more affective realm is one that's very much developing for us as nurse educators to try to tap this in our students. But there are whole nursing programs, and you may have graduated from one of them, that have based their theoretical framework on some of these theories. So we have a local nursing program here in Las Vegas where the caring theory is still very much front and center in their curriculum. And they try to integrate that through the student experiences as they're going through. So these are, just a couple, but, Knoll's kind of, adult learning theory, some just call it adult learning principles, that kind of transcends a lot of things. So I'm not going to go into Gene Watson's theory, but it's kind of, it's an interesting theory, and you hope that the nurse that takes care of you has aspects of this as they're caring for you, because it really gets to the relational component and how we can help to set a healing environment for a patient, for them to reach their potential. Now, adult learning theory, I'm not going to talk about it much here, but I will when we get to the handouts. So I want to kind of move to the handout pretty quick. And before we do, I had to toss in a slide on clinical judgment because it bears direct relationship to educational theories. And it's something that is front and center now in the work that we do with students. We are constantly trying to develop their clinical judgment so that they make better decisions, safer decisions for the patients that they work with. So it is a process. It's also something you've heard Dr. Tan probably talk about in his role at the Board of Nursing, because the NCLEX is moving toward questions that are truly trying to discern clinical judgment of graduates that are getting ready to enter practice. So the clinical judgment you would expect of someone who's been in practice a year or 5 or 10 is certainly different than what you would expect of somebody coming out of a program. But they must still be safe. So we want to develop them in terms of clinical judgment. And of all the definitions that clinical judgment as a phrase has been around for a long time, but still this definition from Dr. Tanner in 2006 is one of the best ones that I've seen. It relates directly to a few theories, and there may be more that you can tie it to, but in the literature I've seen it tied to these two, and that's cognitive continuation theory and experiential learning theory. So if you think about for example, the cognitive continuation theory helps us understand that clinical judgment occurs on a continuum. And at one end of the continuum, I suppose you would call it the left side of the continuum, the beginning of it, is more intuition. So intuition is that what we understand or what we think or how we would judge something, but not based necessarily on empirical data, not based on anything other than this is what we think. This is what I think should happen. Some nurses would call this is my gut instinct about what I should do. And we use it. We use it as nurses. But this is the kind of thinking that can occur. You can come to judgments here that are really rapid, and they're very often not as conscious because you haven't really gone through any kind of an analytical process to get there. Versus the other end of the continuum, which is, analytic, all analytic. So all based on the data that's in front of you. And honestly, in nursing situations, most things are falling in some type of middle ground that requires your intuition, but it also requires some analysis of information and data. And they call that whole area quasi-rationality. So the question is, how do we, if we assume that people have much more, or maybe not very much, intuition, we don't want them flying off the handle and just making decisions based on that when there's information available. So we're trying to help them learn how to use that information, how to discern the quality of that information so that they can come to a judgment and make those sound clinical decisions. So I find that a very useful theory to look at, and you can explore it a lot more. And then, of course, experiential learning. But what's implied in there is that it's process development of the ability of clinical judgment occurs over time. So we would never expect that a first semester student could do what a final semester student could do, right? We're helping them to get there. So it's a function of time. Time is in the equation. It's a function of time and number of exposures to different experiences. It's content. And this is all developing over time, which gets us to experiential learning and learning by doing. And also included in experiential is reflecting on what you've done and driving that reflection into doing it better. So now I want to, does anybody have any questions or comments? Anybody see themselves in one of those realms? Nobody? Okay. Okay, this is not what I had planned. Okay, so I'm thinking, if I was going to put myself in one, I probably would put myself more in the constructivist one. And if you look at your teaching, you'll know pretty quickly which one you fall more into. And it may be more than one. Yeah?
I think I'm a constructivist and I have some big humanist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's true. Have you ever had the teacher who, and it may have been a not good experience for you or a great experience that was just like strictly in the humanist, and you maybe felt like, and maybe that was what you needed, but maybe, I didn't really get very much out of it, but I felt good in the class. Yeah, I've had a couple teachers like that. Or the ones that are so pure behaviorist that it is, that it was every waking moment for me to try to please this teacher to get that score. So, we are different degrees of these things.
I found that there's not enough copies of your handout, so I will probably make extra one after this session. I will leave
Sure.
it on Mary Marie's office.
Sure. So what I did was I put together, for years and years I've been going through the literature because I'm one of those wacky people that really likes learning about where theories are used and how they were used and what kind of results they saw from them. And there's evidence behind all these theories in terms of research that's been conducted using these educational theories. So there is an evidence base out there. So this is part of having an evidence-based teaching practice, is using theories that have had some research done around them. So I put a lot more detail in here for you about cognitive learning theory and some of the major tenets of it. But I want to focus on the right side of the column with the practical uses. So just simple ways that you're using, like I said, you may not have known it by this name, but you're using these theories in your teaching practice and thinking about where can I use them more? How can I engage these students more? So just having the student explain what they were just taught. So think about this with patients. We call this now teach back. So we want to know what the patient has understood. How have they processed what we have just explained to them? And it may not be at all what you told them. But how do we know if we don't ask? Right? So those kind of things are really good. Post-conferences are great for that. Simulation debriefings, an excellent place where this happens. Excellent. Case studies, another good example. And some things projects that unfold over time. Really, really good. So then in the constructivist learning theory, continuing to move away from the teacher at the center, but more the teacher as the guide. And students are becoming very actively responsible for their learning. And then looking for ways to engage them where they're connected. And that's a little bit of a departure from cognitive. So in cognitive, they can be connected, but in cognitive more what you think of is their connection is with content, and their connection may be with you, the teacher. So when we add in this element of how they're really connected to each other, because there's learning that's occurring from others, you're really starting to get to that more constructivist aspect. And we almost all use some type of group stuff in our course at some point, somewhere. It's either activities that they have to do, or it's something for grades or something, right? Okay. And then, sorry about the way this is stapled together. Social learning theory is another big one that we have. This one really gets into how we role model. And it's very important. And I always tell people, because I haven't always paid attention to this for myself, but I always now tell people, whether you like it or not, you're role modeling 24 hours a day to everyone that's around you. So you're either, you want to do it or you don't, or you're conscious about it or you're not, but what you do is modeling something to someone else. And it kind of has stopped me as a teacher to make me think about what I do and how I do it, how I say it, what I say, when I say it. So it's made me much, much more conscious about that. So let's see. Okay. In social learning theory, things like, and you find elements of this also in behaviorism. So the feedback that a student is getting is really important. Positive encouragement is really important. But you're still stretching them. So they need constructive feedback, but not in a way that's going to destroy them and tune them completely out. which is a skill. We develop this as skills. And there are lots of teachers, and some of you are here today, that do use lots of incentives in your teaching. Little things, kind of little things that we do. You put students in groups, and when the group gets the right answer first or whatever, they get something. They get points, or they get a treat, or they get something. This is an area, the social learning theory is the one where people philosophically would subscribe to things like peer teaching, anything that we could do where we put peers together and expect peer learning is occurring, or in the use of near-peer mentors. That's another big concept that can relate very well to this. And the near-peer mentoring is somebody who's got a little bit more experience than you do. So it could be the second semester students mentoring first semester students, because they know what they just went through, and so on like that. So it's not exactly somebody that's exactly on my level, but they're pretty close in proximity. And then moving to this one, so that's constructivist, right? I've got a whole lot here on experiential learning theory, which is why I kind of breezed over it. It's a very big one that we use. And again, I think that there are probably aspects of this that you're using when you have students that are doing something and reflecting on something, and then using the reflection to do something better or different, you're using it. So it's their learning experience, they're learning by doing it and reflecting on what they do, and then using that to improve what they're doing. So those are all good. And then I had to put my standby one in, which is adult learning theory, because everybody, if you spend any time looking at a theory, whether it's a practice theory or it's an educational theory, if you come across one that like instantly starts making sense to you, this is one that's resonating with you. And it may be one that you're more likely to use. And it may be one that more closely describes you as a learner. And that was the case for me when I first looked at adult learning and the principles in adult learning. So it helped me very much to understand that students learn what they think is important to learn when they think that it has some relevant connection to their life as a nurse, to them. So the more you can, that's how we got to the whole notion of authentic experiences or authentic case studies, trying to mirror as close as possible what they'll really see in practice. So these kind of things help us to understand they like to drive a lot of aspects of their learning. They want to be involved in their learning. They like to make decisions in their learning. And not all learners fit nicely into these areas, but a lot of them do. So that matters for how we unroll things to them over the course of a semester. So anyway, these are just some of the more common ones, and that's just for you to take, and certainly there are dozens and dozens more, and there's lots more about these theories if you're interested in doing a deep dive, which I bet that's what you're all going to do when you go back to your offices. Do that very deep dive. So I want to say that, it's a very interesting exercise to examine your educational philosophy to see how and where it's reflected in your teaching. And you may think that it's not, but it is. And it matters. It may matter as you are understanding your own philosophy more, where maybe this is where I had that problem with another educator who really has a very different philosophy than I do. And it helps us understand why educators hopefully are working to get appointments in nursing programs that align with their philosophy. and then using educational theory to kind of conceptualize and design and to evaluate your teaching and your learning. And always remember that, you use the aspects of theories that work well for the group of students that you have and the ones that are usable to you. So it doesn't mean from A to Z in the theory you're using every piece of it. We use components of theories all the time. Absolutely okay. And does anybody have any questions about all this? Yeah.
On the adult learning theory, is there, do you think, like an age group that fits better? Like not millennials or maybe the X, where you're saying how they come knowing what they want to know? Because I find like with the younger students, that's with the older students I see adult learning theory, but to me adult isn't, because you're age 18, you're considered an adult.
Right.
You know what I mean? It seems to apply more to the older students.
Right.
Am I wrong in this?
So one, you're absolutely right. You can't fit them all into one, category. But I have found that with younger students, the social constructivists, things along social constructivists, have been very helpful. It's not that students won't do the work, but they seem to need more guidance. They seem to need more guidance in it, and they like doing it together. Their ability to be able to access information is affecting so much of everything. We don't spend very much time talking about that, but it's really, really affected them as learners. And, good is sometimes maybe not so good. So that's a whole nother session. But look at stuff in social learning and social constructivist to help a little bit with that. Other questions? I honestly cannot thank you enough for sitting through an hour of educational theory. I thought, oh yeah, there's a lot of people in here, but they're going to bolt in about 10 or 15 minutes. I've got a class to teach or something. So I want to thank you all, and I hope that this, at the very least, has inspired other teachers in the room to want to present it an educational brown bag, because there are a zillion topics of interest for faculty members. Thanks for taking this time about your practice.
Thank you.